Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. As we begin today's press briefing, want to point out a few things throughout this process. We have repeated multiple times the fact that we are working and making decisions at the recommendation of the Centers for Disease Control and also at the advice and recommendation of our local experts, our local epidemiologist, our local health authority, our health department director, and we continue to operate in that same way, making recommendations and decisions based upon their input and advice. Also throughout this process, and in the strong team we have back here, I've been working very closely with Mayor Raleigh McCoy in making these decisions that impact our entire community and our shared constituency. We've also made it a point to daily point out the 0 confirmed cases that we've had. The reason for that is to dispel the rumors that pop up every day saying that there are confirmed cases. So we've responded to that by pointing out 0 confirmed cases. I want to be especially clear and point out that we aren't waiting for the first case in Victoria County of COVID-19, the first confirmed case, to act. We've been working on this issue, preparing for this for well over the past month. It's likely that we will see a case here in Victoria County of COVID-19, whether that's travel related or otherwise, another topic, but we've been preparing for that and working to be prepared to adapt to the changes that we see every day. We've been monitoring this constantly and have been prepared to adapt and to respond. Today we're taking some additional steps to prepare for the impacts of COVID-19. As most of you know, the Centers for Disease Control changed its recommendations late yesterday evening, recommending that crowds of over 50 be canceled, folks not attend those functions. I know that even as we speak, there's talk of amending those recommendations to an even smaller number. We are prepared to adapt to those new recommendations and will follow the lead of the CDC in reference to that. A few minutes ago, I was prepared to make the recommendation to the community that if people holding events of over 50 cancel those, that the public not attend those. But it looks like in the coming hours we'll be adapting that even further to lower that threshold. But we will be following the advice and recommending that the community voluntarily follow the recommendations of the CDC. The second step we're taking today is that in order to be most fully prepared for COVID-19 and in order to be best ready to adapt to changing circumstances, Mayor McCoy and I, moments ago, both signed a declaration of local disaster within the county and within the city. The purpose of that was to put us in line for receiving any state or federal aid that might be needed down the road. It's also to set the table for us to respond quickly to any changing needs that we see. These disaster declarations that the mayor and I have signed don't include compulsory mandates at this point as it pertains to crowd size or movement of people, but it does set the table to allow us to enact those restrictions when and if needed. Again, those decisions will be made based upon the advice of our local experts and the Centers for Disease Control. One trigger point that we've discussed up until now was local spread of this virus, local transmission. We're approaching things more from a regional aspect rather than just Victoria County, knowing full well that our folks travel within our geographic area. This local disaster declaration that the mayor and I have signed does not include any mandates as it pertains to any school districts. It does not give suggestions to the superintendents of our schools about the decisions that they face. At this point, questions related to those school districts are up to the superintendents, and we continue to work closely with them and communicate with them on a regular basis. Regarding the recommendation of following the CDC advice about crowd size, both the city and the county are practicing what we preach in terms of events that the county and the city have purview over. The county, for example, earlier today I visited with the coordinator of the Texas Mile out at the airport that was to occur. We agreed that it was the best course of action that be postponed, so that will be postponed. In terms of the effects on county operations, county business, at this point we don't have any advice from our experts suggesting that the county reduce service, curtail service, or close offices. Outside of the steps that the jail and the juvenile detention center have taken that we've previously discussed, we don't see a need at this moment to close county offices, but we will be prepared, like with everything else, to change those protocols and to adapt as needed. I'm going to turn the microphone over now to Mayor Raleigh McCoy for some remarks from him. Mayor.
Thank you, Judge. As the judge has mentioned, we found it necessary, given the ever-changing climate on this situation, to go ahead and declare a local emergency. We did this to put us in a position to be able to react quicker as things change, which they are doing hourly. We see that on what's going on. The president is right now in the middle of a press conference himself. His medical experts are giving advice and changing scenarios on what to do. But the declaration itself puts us in a position that we can take actions either voluntarily or mandatory. I personally prefer the approach of asking people to comply in a voluntary situation. When that happens and people do comply, then all of our city and county resources can be sent to them in a form of assistance. Once we make a declaration and make it mandatory, I would hate to see those resources be spent in enforcement. So that's one of the huge differences. I think that the situation that the judge mentioned with the Texas Mile, I think the willingness of that group to follow our suggestion made it abundantly clear to me that most responsible people are going to voluntarily respond to our edicts. A lot of as things move forward, you will probably see as we put out policy mandates, you will probably see a mixture of mandated actions as well as asking for voluntary actions. So that's how we would hope it will work, but rest assured that we are ready to act and to move immediately as things change, in which they will. And I might add, there's been questions in the community about what we're doing with our more vulnerable groups of citizens, the homeless and such. I can assure you that our city manager has assigned the 2 assistant city managers as liaisons to those groups. I think I was just informed that he's been in contact with Ms. Stafford. Ms. Stafford's coming tomorrow night to a city council meeting that I asked her to come back. So I'm sure the subject matter that we'll discuss with her will change a bit, but rest assured that that segment of our community is going to be cared for and looked out for to the extent we can. So what I can say is, on a personal note, The one advantage of living the years that I've lived through a lot of things in my life. I can remember as a child living through the polio scare, when I can remember my parents saying we're not going to the movies and we're not going to the swimming pool. And those were serious times as well. That was a devastating disease. So I ask people to rest assured that things will get better in the appropriate amount of time, and rest assured that everybody here is working tirelessly to prepare to deal with what's coming. And I can tell you from my own personal thing, the last 4 or 5 days of my life have been fully devoted to pondering this situation. I've come down here, I spend most of my hours here at this center, and when I go home, that's all that's on my mind. And so please rest assured that your leaders take this very seriously, and we're prepared to take the actions necessary to protect our citizens. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Jesus Garza.
Thank you, Mayor. Jesus Garza, City Manager for the City of Victoria. In the spirit of what we're recommending our community do with the various events and limiting those events, we've also taken it upon ourselves to cancel some events. And so obviously with this being spring break, there's a substantial amount of events that have been scheduled at the library and also with our Parks and Recreation Department. Those immediately have been canceled. There will be more information related to those specific events coming on social media immediately following today's press conference. But we do want to ask for people's help in spreading the message that all the programming that had been scheduled at the library is no longer taking place, and then also events taking place at our recreational facilities. But again, more information to come on those cancellations. We're also in the process of evaluating our daily operations. We obviously at the city have several key operational departments that do come together and bring people together, I should say, such as municipal court, our utility billing operation. And so we are assessing how to handle and how to kind of mitigate the risk involved in those operations. And so I do plan on, as soon as tomorrow or the day after, have more detailed information on how we're going to be scheduling things around those operations and how we'll be making a shift to encourage people to continue that process, pay their bill online and things of that sort. And so more information to come on that, but again, I'll reiterate that all events at the library scheduled to take place at the library this week, as well as our park and recreation facilities, have been canceled, and we'll continue to assess that and determine at a future date how long we continue the cancellation of those events. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Dr. McNeil now.
Good afternoon, Dr. John McNeil, Local Health Authority with the Health Department. Basically, I just have a few things I want to go over, kind of some of the nuts and bolts of what we're doing and why we're doing it from a medical standpoint. At that point, I'll take some questions if you have any questions. You know, when we look at this, one of the things that's happening right now is that we're limiting social gathering. And I say this because it's important. And I say this because it's not only the CDC recommendation, it's just common sense. One of the things that we have to understand, and probably one of the most important things we have to understand about this virus, is that we don't have a whole lot of things we can do to treat it or to prevent it. We don't have a vaccine. We don't have a specific medicine that treats COVID-19. So when you get down to it, the only thing we really have is just the ability to isolate ourselves and keep ourselves from getting sick. And that's what all this is about. They're limiting the number of people. When we got ready to talk about this today, the number was 50. I just heard the president say they're going to drop it to 10. I don't know if that's a CDC recommendation or not, but there are numbers that are coming. So this is a fluid situation, and this is going to continue to change. But rest assured, these changes are based on quantifiable data. They're getting more information every day about this disease, and we're getting a lot more information on how many people are actually infected and how many people are getting very sick and even how many people are dying. So that's what this stuff is about. It's about keeping y'all safe and keeping us all safe. You know, we all have families, and we're all out there ourselves. So we want everybody to do well. That's why the guidances have changed. You know, we talked about this, and we've always said that we want business as usual, but then a little while ago while we were talking, we said, well, it's not really usual to declare a disaster. So we're probably not business as usual right now, but we are taking precautionary steps so that we're more prepared for this. I've said from the very beginning, and everybody up here agrees, that we need to be proactive and not reactive. So the steps that we take, the steps that we do, they're all based on sound medical knowledge and the best information that we have available to us, and we're just basically the conduit to pass it on to the people of our area. Some of the things we talk about, of course, there's a new term now, social distancing. I'd never heard that term before, but now they're saying don't get close to people. It used to be it was important to show that you want to be around people, a little hand touch and things like that. It's a different set of rules now. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. But that's what I'm saying. So if you're at work, try and stay 5 or 6 feet away from people. That's what they're recommending. If you're sick, don't go to work. If you're sick, call your doctor. Don't just show up at your clinic with high fever and a cough, because there's always a chance of spreading the disease, and that's what we're talking about, is slowing that spread. The schools are going to have some recommendations, and that's going to be up to the superintendent, and that'll all be discussed when those decisions have been made. They talked about going to movies, gyms, things like that. It's my understanding that a lot of the gyms have really cut back on the number of people going to them, and some have even closed. Basically, we need to look at what the CDC says, and right now they say no groups greater than 50, and it's a recommendation. It's not mandatory. But I can tell you myself, from my own standpoint, I don't really want to go to any events where there's a bunch of people, and that's just common sense, I think. So there's some other cases that we've talked about, as far as a case in Yoakum that has been fully investigated by the state and also by the local epidemiologists. So that condition has been isolated, and we think we've got a pretty good handle on that. There's also a case in Matagorda County that people have talked about, but it's my understanding that patient did not have any extensive travel, but there was some travel around. So, and I think that one's been isolated as well. So we're still going on the premise that we don't have any community transmission. And as we've said before, there are no confirmed cases in Victoria County. There's several things that we're, of course, investigating, and we get calls every day, and I get calls in my office about people that have a cough and fever. So these are all investigated, they're all looked at, and this information is kept, and then, of course, it's disseminated to everyone. So we're going to be transparent. We always have, and we always will. Okay. Do you have any questions? I can answer any questions before I turn it over.
Could we start, and this can be addressed by, I think, anyone up there, but we've talked a lot about misinformation over the past couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we know there are no confirmed cases in the county. Can you just address some, crazy rumors about there being cases from as far back as December or January of COVID-19?
Right. You said the word crazy. They're not there. I mean, they're just not there. I mean, I don't know where these things come from, but anybody can get on Facebook and say something, and all of a sudden it becomes gospel. But that's just not true. There are no confirmed cases. I promise you, there are no confirmed cases.
And similarly, I guess a rumor that kind of went nationwide was that there was going to be nationwide quarantine, which I think the federal government came out today and said that was not the case. But can we hear that from you as well?
Well, I've heard nothing about a nationwide quarantine, and pretty much from the beginning, the state services. I'm touching my glasses, not my face. Let the record reflect. But what I'm saying is that there's been no talk of quarantine, and we try to get away from that word, because you hear the word quarantine, you think of somebody coming and grabbing you and throwing you in a van and hauling you off to someplace with a fence, and that's not what we're talking about. What we're encouraging is isolation. And isolation's a good idea. It's good for it's good for everybody. So I know there are no talk of quarantines now. And in fact, if there was a quarantine, it would have to come from the health department, and it would have to be signed by the local health authority. And I can promise you, I've signed none of those either. Okay. So there's no talk of quarantine.
Are you recommending that folks work from home if they're able to?
Absolutely. The Centers for Disease Control recommends that. We're recommending that especially high-risk groups, and that's a good point to bring out. And high risk are patients that are either immunosuppressed, and we used to think that immunosuppressed was just people that had organ transplants. Like if you had a kidney transplant, you're on immunosuppressant therapy, you're on medicines to knock down your immune system. But that's not the case anymore, because if you watch TV, you'll see all the new medications they come up with, and every one of those, the side effect is immunosuppression. the great medications for rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis, and they're called monoclonal antibody drugs, but one of the side effects is that they suppress your immune system. So there are a lot of people out there that can serve as a reservoir for this disease. So those patients need to be more careful. And then, of course, the magic age of 65. So I've seen 60. I like 65 better because it's a little further away, of course. But what I'm saying is that if you're elderly and you have other medical problems, then, you know, the bar goes up. You need to be more careful. And they're saying to avoid crowds, avoid public gatherings, avoid people, especially if they're sick. So they even recommend that you make sure you have a supply of medication and supply of things that you're going to need at home to get by.
And you mentioned some of those folks who might be a little higher risk. Can you just go through maybe some other diagnoses or other populations who we might consider in that more vulnerable group?
Well, the vulnerable groups, of course, include chronic medical conditions, high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypercholesterolemia, the things that make people sick. If you have multiple medical problems, you are statistically more likely to become ill. So.
And of course, we hope we don't get to this point, but you know, should we be seeing, you know, cases, local cases, folks needing hospital treatment? Are we, you know, are our hospitals prepared with enough capacity, enough PPE, enough ventilators?
Both hospitals have we've really looked at this, and we've looked at our equipment, we've taken inventory of what we have, and we've actually looked at ways of getting more equipment if we need it. Mm-hmm. So I would say yes. And we have three really good hospitals here in Victoria. So, and they are prepared, and trust me, I work at one of the big hospitals. I work at Citizens. I guess there's no hiding, it's on my shirt. But we are prepared, and we go through things every day, and we've had several, I would say drills, but they're actual patients that come in that may be possibly exposed, and fortunately those have all turned out well. But we've gone through these things, and we're very prepared.
Are we expecting to see, is there anything else that hospitals need to do to prepare for more cases should we get there?
You know, if there's more preparation to be done, I'm not sure what it is, because we have gone through a lot of contingencies, been a whole lot of meetings, been a lot of time, and we base that on CDC guidelines. We actually have guidelines from that and the other organizations.
And then going back to what we were just talking about a minute ago, for those folks who are at a more high-risk group, any other preventative measures that they should be doing that we haven't already talked about or that you'd want to reiterate?
Well, of course, reiteration of washing your hands. You know, that's where most of the stuff, they say that 80% of all infections come from your hands to your mouth. So if you can knock out 80%, that'd be a real nice thing. So the other thing, of course, is droplet therapy, and that's from coughing and sneezing from individuals that are sick. And then, of course, the overall thing of just being healthy, you know, staying healthy and exercising and keeping yourself fit and keeping yourself to where you're not sick. I mean, if you're ill from something else, then your immune system will be compromised and you're more likely to catch something like this.
And you mentioned the case in Matagorda and the case in Yoakum. I just wanted to clarify, at this point, do we know how the patient in Yoakum became infected? We don't believe it was a case of community transmission?
We don't believe that was a case of community transmission. They were able to isolate that, and they were able to isolate the people around the contact person, and that has been done very well. Okay. We have some wonderful epidemiology people that they track this stuff down. Okay. They really do.
And the same for the case in Matagorda, we don't believe that's a case?
I don't have as much information on that, but I do know that the patient is hospitalized and that there was no specific, the last I heard was that, and this was just a few minutes ago, that there was no out of the country movement around. In other words, they weren't traveling out of the country, but supposedly they had gone somewhere where it was still in the United States. It's not just out of the country now, it's certainly in the United States.
We've gotten some questions from folks. Of course, we know the vast majority of folks who get infected with COVID-19 do not require hospitalization. For those who do, you know, what kind of treatment, what kind of, you know, as you mentioned, we have no vaccine. Right. What kind of treatment can they expect?
This is a virus. I mean, basically, think of how you felt if you've had the flu. Most people in here probably had the flu. So it's a viral illness, and that's probably what we would expect. In younger people, it seems to be a lot, well, they're just stronger and younger. And so we see it pretty frequently in younger people, and there's probably a lot of people that have had it that didn't even know they had it. They felt bad for a few days, they had a low-grade fever, they didn't go to the doctor, they got well. So it's the patients that are immunosuppressed, the patients that are compromised, the elderly, and the people we've just been talking about that can develop a specific form of pneumonia, and it can be life-threatening.
Obviously, we probably know less about this disease than we actually know about it, but do we know whether someone can get infected, recover, and then get infected again? That was a question that one reader had for us.
I would think that that would have to do with the immunity of the individual, but most patients, all healthy patients, once they're infected with something, their immune system will build some degree of resistance. Now, can you get the flu twice in 1 year? Well, there's different strains of the flu, and they haven't really talked about this specific virus mutating to another virus, but it does do what we call drift, and it will change a little bit, and it can cause a little bit different illness in different individuals. So to answer your question, I would say a resounding probably.
We've talked before about kind of steps that other facilities, hospitals, jails, nursing homes have taken. Any updates on daycare facilities, if they're changing their operations in any way to protect folks who are?
I've not seen anything on that. Does anybody know any daycare stuff?
I haven't heard.
You know what, they tell me, they said, somebody's going to ask you something that you don't know the answer to, but you tell them that we'll get with it tomorrow. So now we have a list, okay, daycare facilities.
And obviously, again, just to reiterate, we have no cases here, but we are seeing communities where there is community transmission, taking actions like ordering the closure of all bars and restaurants. Seems unlikely at this point, but is that something that could happen in the future here?
In a word, absolutely, it could. It's just going to depend. We're trying to be proactive, but there's a fine line between being very proactive and being overly active and taking away people's civil liberties and being able to do the things that they want to in their life. So we have to balance that back and forth. And there's times back in the rooms when we're talking about it that not all of us agree. So, but that's why we have different opinions, and then we look at what we're doing, and then we look at what the Centers for Disease Control and what the State Health Services says, and then we make decisions based on that information.
And the Victoria COVID-19 public hotline went live today. Can you tell us how folks have been utilizing that? Maybe how many calls you've gotten, what kind of questions, where folks are most confused or concerned?
I'd heard that it was being used. David, do you have any?
We've had about 3 dozen calls so far.
There you go. 3 dozen calls. And you can add that to the couple of dozen in my office. So anyway, all right. Okay.
And this might not be known yet, but anything in particular that folks are, confused about or don't understand that is, worth reiterating now?
I think a lot of people are just calling in wanting the general reassurance that we're here to answer questions for them, and we're more than happy to do that with the hotline right now.
Okay. Thank you for your questions. All right. If that's it, thank you very much. And Chief Fox, our very esteemed fire chief, is going to talk to us right now.
Thank you, Dr. McNeil. Chief Tracy Fox, representing the Emergency Operations Center's command staff. As was mentioned a couple of press conferences ago, we have a very strategic plan that we're working off of. So we wanted to kind of talk about that today and give you a visual reference of what that plan is. Before we talk about the plan, it was mentioned earlier today, when we talk about in this plan community and local and things like that, as the judge and the mayor said, we're looking at our region is our community, because we recognize Victoria County, the city of Victoria, is a regional hub for commerce, medical, all those type of things. So we recognize that, if something is very close to us, more than likely it will impact Victoria. So we developed over here, where did he go? Where did it show? So as you see, we have a representation of our strategic plan for this event, starting with the initial, incident in China, all the way through where we're locally recovering. And right now, we are in phase 2 is what we're considering, which is basically there's a global pandemic established. There's local cases of positive COVID-19, which, as we mentioned, there's one in Yoakum and one in Matagorda County. So that's kind of where we're at. And at each one of these phases, there are action points or trigger points, and then actions to be taken off those trigger points. So we just want y'all to see that this plan is there, it's available, and it stretches from the beginning to the end of this event. Now, this is a very fluid and dynamic document. As CDC puts out new guidance, we shift those actions and trigger points. So it's a very fluid document. So this document may look a little different tomorrow than it does today based on CDC guidance and actions and events that are occurring. What is the next phase? The next phase is 3, we're calling it, and that's when we have widespread community transmission in our region, in our community, if you will, or we have multiple cases. In that situation, we just increase that social distancing. There may be orders sent out by the judge and the mayor, like prohibiting or limiting social gatherings. As you mentioned, at that point, that's maybe when we say, you know what, all bars and restaurants are shut down. So that's kind of how we build our phases. And then after phase 3, it's kind of the decline phase all the way to the recovery. So be happy to answer any questions on that phase and strategic planning.
Chief Fox, can you so right now we have no cases of community transmission. Is there like a 2.5 where there's a couple of cases, or the first case of community transmission where things might change a little bit?
So if community transmission starts happening, we'll look at that and evaluate that. If it's isolated, then that means different than we don't have any control over it. So there's community transmission that's kind of isolated in maybe a smaller community in our region versus, let's say, Victoria, where you have a population mass. So that number is basically a ratio or a rate of transmission that we look at before we make that decision. The last thing I want to add, we got some questions the other day about donating of blood during this COVID-19 crisis. And we reached out to our blood bank, South Texas Blood and Tissue Center, and we also looked at American Red Cross, and they are encouraging to continue to donate blood. Healthy people, we would like for you to continue to donate blood. There was already a crisis and shortage before this event, and it will only get worse as this event goes on. Now, once again, that's healthy people. We want you to continue to donate. They do have screening procedures in place. If you do show up and are ready to donate, they will be going through a screening process to ensure that you're safe to donate. All right, now we'll open it up for more questions.
David, was there anything in particular?
Dr. McNeil covered most of that.
To follow up on what the mayor had mentioned in terms of our preference to ask that folks voluntarily do certain things, that is certainly our preference. Speaking of questions that have come up, I know one that I've gotten, probably the mayor has too, is why not make this mandatory? The crowds of 50 or more, that recommendation that we're going off of, which appears to be changing as we speak and to it's going to be lowered. We think at this point that the community will respond to that. The event organizers I've spoken to thus far are postponing their events. So we think we can achieve a positive outcome by asking folks to voluntarily do those things, both event organizers and also the public going to those events. One, I guess, update that'll happen tomorrow is what is that number going to be lowered to? Walking in here, we thought it was 50. It'd be our recommendation 50 or more, but apparently that's going to drop. But we're going to mirror what the CDC recommends as far as our recommendation. Other questions that have come up relate to what those gatherings, what that applies to. In particular, churches have reached out to us, and that recommendation, that crowd size, does apply to churches. So that's been our response to that question, and whether it was the 50 that we had walking into here or a minute ago or a smaller number, it does apply to churches. I think, let's see, David, you said you didn't have anything additional? Okay. Okay. Any questions in closing that you might have? There's been some excellent ones thus far.
Just quickly, obviously, as we've noted many times, this is a rapidly changing situation that changes hourly, if not faster. Saturday and Sunday, kind of the message that we received was, take extra precautions, wash your hands, business as usual. That's not the indication today.
Correct.
What has changed in the last 24 hours?
What's changed in the last 24 hours is, one, the change in recommendation from the CDC late yesterday evening, the change that's apparently occurring right now. Just looking at the overall environment, the way trends are looking, and the direction of our local experts. And And really, we can't overemphasize that enough, that this is a fluid situation, and what was the best advice a day or two ago may not apply today. So we're working hard to be able to adapt to the newest information and also the newest changes that occur in this situation. No, not business as usual anymore. The recommendations we're making will impact people's schedules and routines, no doubt about that. But within the confines of those recommendations, hopefully business as much as possible. But again, we'll be here as we have been, 3 o'clock tomorrow. In the meantime, I want to remind folks about our public hotline, the one referenced a while ago, 580-5796. The source for accurate local information continues to be victoriatxoem.org, the Health Department's Facebook page. That's where we would refer folks to, and we'll continue monitoring things and also looking for questions that arise so that we can answer them. Tomorrow, we had confirmation on the superintendent?
Yeah.
It'd be important to note that Dr. Shepard with VISD has confirmed he will be here at tomorrow's 3 o'clock meeting for questions related to VISD activities and plans. So I guess in closing, we would want to reemphasize the things that we have thus far. Even with a heightened level of recommendation, the panic purchasing of food and toilet paper and bottled water is not necessary. Like we mentioned, this is not an issue that affects the food supply or the availability of clean water. So no need for stockpiling. I think the folks up here, as you've seen, really are some incredible professionals, incredible experts who I'm proud to work with. And with that, we'll leave you and look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Thank you.